the nation froze when whispers of a secret recording began circulating through royal corridors, a tape so explosive it threatened to shatter everything the House of Windsor built. Hidden for years, it allegedly captured Prince Andrew's private confessions, words he never meant for the world to hear. But when those words reached his daughter, Princess Beatrice, the future of the monarchy took an emotional and irreversible turn. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began like an echo in the shadows. An encrypted message, quietly delivered to a palace aide, containing what appeared to be an audio file of unknown origin. At first, the staff dismissed it as another cruel hoax meant to discredit the monarchy. But when the aide pressed play, the unmistakable voice of Prince Andrew filled the air. It wasn't the tone of a proud royal or a man defending his past, it was the trembling confession of someone who could no longer carry the burden of silence. Within hours, those who heard it understood its magnitude. This was no ordinary scandal. It was a revelation capable of rewriting royal history. Rumors spread like wildfire. Inside the palace, whispers spoke of secret dealings, veiled regrets, and haunting acknowledgments of choices made behind gilded doors. Andrew's voice, calm yet cracking, spoke of pressures from unseen forces and decisions that had cost him more than reputation. Advisors scrambled to contain the leak, locking down communication lines and sealing internal servers, but it was too late. The soundbite had already been copied, replicated, and circulated among those desperate to expose the monarchy's hidden fractures. Beatrice was among the first to be informed. A trusted aide broke the news in private, urging her not to listen, but curiosity and fear overpowered her restraint. As Andrew's trembling confession reached her ears, her world collapsed. Sources close to her described that moment as devastating, her hands shaking, her eyes filling with disbelief as she replayed her father's voice again and again, searching for meaning. The girl who had always defended her family's name now faced a truth she never imagined. Her father's words could destroy the very family she loved. Outside the palace gates, chaos ignited. The confession tape became the headline dominating every network, the phrase echoing through screens and radio waves across the world. Overnight, the monarchy found itself under siege. Commentators questioned how long this secret had been buried, while protesters demanded transparency. The Royal Communications Office issued a carefully worded statement, denying nothing, yet confirming even less, fueling speculation that the palace was in full damage control mode. At Balmoral, the gravity of the situation was unmistakable. King Charles, visibly strained, summoned his most trusted advisors to assess the fallout. Queen Camilla sat in silence beside him, her gaze heavy with the understanding that this was no ordinary scandal. It was a direct strike at the crown's moral foundation. Every whisper, every hesitation, every pause in the conversation was a reminder that the monarchy's survival depended not on power, but on perception. As the news continued to spread, every royal residence fell into lockdown-like silence. Phones were confiscated, staff briefed to say nothing, and security intensified. But within the chaos, one thing became clear. No amount of control could contain what had already begun. The confession wasn't just a scandal, it was the beginning of an unraveling, a thread pulled from the very fabric of the royal order. And as the palace walls trembled under the weight of Andrew's recorded words, one woman, his eldest daughter, made a decision that would redefine her role forever. Inside the quiet halls of her London home, Princess Beatrice listened to her father's voice shaking, remorseful, and filled with truths she was never meant to hear. The woman who had always stood silently behind royal decorum suddenly found herself face to face with a heartbreak only a daughter could feel. The moment the recording ended, Beatrice's tears weren't just of shock, they were of betrayal. The sound of her father's trembling confession lingered long after the tape stopped playing, every word carved deeper into her mind, leaving behind a storm of disbelief and sorrow. Beatrice had spent her life defending her family's name, believing that no matter how fractured things became, the bond between them would remain unshakable. But now, hearing the man she idolized speak of hidden actions and unspoken guilt, she felt something inside her shatter. Her heart, once a shield for the monarchy's image, began to question everything she had been raised to protect. She sat alone, her phone glowing dimly beside her, messages from aides and distant relatives flooding in. None of them mattered. Her world had tilted, and in that moment, Beatrice was not a princess. She was a daughter whose father had broken her trust. When her mother, Sarah Ferguson, arrived unannounced, Beatrice didn't need to explain. One look into her daughter's tear-streaked face told Sarah everything. Beatrice handed her the phone with shaking hands, urging her to listen, but Sarah refused. "Some things," she whispered, "are too painful to hear." Her plea for silence came not from denial, but from fear. Fear of what the truth might demand them to do. That night, memories flooded back to Beatrice like waves, images of her father teaching her to ride, his laughter echoing through the countryside, his reassuring words during public storms. Those moments once defined safety and love, but now, they felt like fragments of a dream dissolving into the harshness of reality. She realized how fragile the line was between loyalty and truth, between protecting the family and protecting herself. Hours passed in silence, until the weight of her thoughts became unbearable. Beatrice called her sister, Princess Eugenie, her voice trembling as she confessed, "I heard it all." Eugenie's initial reaction was disbelief, followed by cautious restraint. Unlike Beatrice, she didn't want to take sides, not yet. Their conversation grew tense, with Eugenie urging her to think before acting, while Beatrice's emotions spiraled into conviction. To her, remaining silent meant accepting her mother's humiliation, and that was something she could no longer do. As dawn approached, Beatrice's heartbreak turned into resolve. She knew her family's legacy depended on silence, but her conscience demanded truth. Every instinct told her to shield her parents, yet the haunting sound of her father's confession refused to fade. It played over and over in her mind, a constant reminder that the world was about to hear what she had already endured in private. And though she tried to brace herself, nothing could prepare her for what was coming next. But before Beatrice could process the pain, the world began hearing fragments of the same tape that left her in tears. No one expected it to happen this fast. Within hours, parts of the alleged confession were aired on late-night networks, sending Buckingham Palace into chaos. Security footage was reviewed, phones confiscated, and leaks traced. But as the royal machines scrambled to suppress the scandal, one undeniable truth emerged. The recording wasn't fake. It was real. And it was damning. The world woke up to the sound of Prince Andrew's voice echoing through every screen, every headline, every radio frequency. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was evidence. Clips of the recording, barely a minute long, sent shockwaves through the media. Analysts dissected every pause, every trembling word, every sigh that carried decades of royal secrets. What had once been private shame had now become public spectacle. And Buckingham Palace, the good, the symbol of control and continuity, suddenly looked fragile. Inside the palace, a frantic war room was assembled. Advisors and intelligence officers gathered under the cold glow of urgency, piecing together how the tape had escaped. The timeline was frighteningly precise. Within 2 hours of Beatrice's emotional breakdown in London, an encrypted file was uploaded from an unidentified device. Within 3, it reached a foreign news outlet known for exposing political corruption. By dawn, it was everywhere. The monarchy's greatest scandal had slipped beyond its grasp. And now, there was no turning back. The Royal Communications Office responded with a calculated phrase, "No comment." But those 2 words only ignited greater suspicion. The silence from the palace felt louder than any denial could. People began to ask dangerous questions. Who had recorded Andrew? Why was this never addressed? And most damning of all, who else inside the palace had known? The tabloids seized their moment. Journalists gathered outside Buckingham's gates, their flashes cutting through the darkness like arrows. As experts analyzed the audio, certain phrases stood out, cryptic references to pressures and promises, suggesting forces far greater than personal regret. Some claimed it hinted at internal royal deals. Others whispered it was part of a larger cover-up that had been buried for years. Intelligence insiders, speaking under anonymity, confirmed the recording appeared to originate from a private interview conducted long ago, an interview that was never meant to be made public. That revelation made everything worse. If the palace had known about this tape all along, their silence was not protection. It was deception. Across Britain, disbelief turned into anger. Social media ignited with calls for transparency, and television anchors spoke of a monarchy at its tipping point. For King Charles, the weight was unbearable. He had fought to modernize the crown, to rebuild its trust after years of scandal, and now it was unraveling before his eyes. Advisors urged restraint, but the public demanded answers. Every hour without a statement deepened the divide between the palace and its people. In the midst of this chaos, Princess Beatrice watched as her father's voice dominated every channel, every conversation, every living room in the country. She could see how the world had turned him into a symbol of disgrace, but what tore her apart wasn't the fall of her father. It was the way her mother, Sarah Ferguson, had been dragged back into the shadows of shame. For Beatrice, remaining silent now meant complicity. And though she was a royal by birth, she was a daughter. First, a daughter who could no longer bear to watch her family collapse in silence. As the monarchy reeled from scandal, Beatrice realized silence would only deepen her mother's humiliation, and that was something she could no longer allow. For the first time in royal history, a daughter stood against the very establishment that shaped her life. Through trembling tears and fierce conviction, Beatrice refused to let her mother become collateral damage in her father's downfall. What began as a quiet act of love soon became an act of rebellion, one that would send shockwaves from Buckingham Palace to every corner of Britain. When the monarchy stayed silent, Beatrice spoke. Her voice, soft but resolute, broke through the carefully constructed wall of royal protocol that had kept generations of women voiceless. Standing before the press, she declared that her mother, Sarah Ferguson, had endured enough judgment, enough ridicule, enough being punished for the mistakes of others. Her words were not rehearsed, not polished by advisors, but raw and real. She spoke as a daughter defending the only person who had ever stood by her, and in doing so, shattered the illusion of royal unity. The moment the footage aired, the world stopped. Beatrice's tear-streaked face filled television screens as her voice quivered between heartbreak and defiance. "My mother deserves respect," she said, her voice breaking. "She has suffered in silence for too long." It wasn't just a statement, it was a cry of liberation, an emotional rebellion against decades of royal hypocrisy. Within minutes, social media erupted. The hashtag #StandWithBeatrice began trending across continents, uniting millions in a digital storm of empathy, outrage, and admiration. Commentators called it the most human moment the royal family had shown in years, a moment that pierced through centuries of controlled image-making. Inside Buckingham Palace, however, Beatrice's defiance was seen as a catastrophe. Senior advisors moved swiftly, demanding she retract her words and issue a formal apology. They feared her statement could fracture the fragile order the monarchy was trying to preserve. Letters were drafted, phone calls made, and aides dispatched. But Beatrice refused. Her resolve hardened under pressure. "I won't betray my mother," she told a confidant, "not even for the crown." Those words, once whispered in private, soon became symbolic, a quiet declaration of independence that resonated far beyond royal walls. Eugenie, torn between loyalty to her sister and allegiance to the family, urged caution. She worried that Beatrice's defiance could make things worse, that the monarchy's wrath would not forgive such disobedience. Their once unbreakable sisterhood strained under the weight of impossible choices. One sought to protect the family's dignity, the other fought to reclaim her mother's. Yet beneath the tension, both sisters shared the same unspoken grief, the realization that their family, already fractured, was now at war with itself. The world watched as Beatrice's courage began to shift public sentiment. For the first time, people saw a royal not as a figure of privilege, but as a daughter caught between love and duty. Newspapers that once criticized the monarchy now praised her honesty. Commentators asked whether this act of vulnerability might actually save the royal image rather than destroy it. Beatrice had unknowingly become a symbol of truth in a kingdom built on silence. But Beatrice's defense of her mother was only the beginning, because what came next from Andrew himself would ignite the final royal meltdown. When the royal world expected silence, Andrew broke it. Sitting before an unseen camera, he began to speak again, this time willingly. His second confession wasn't a denial, but a deepening of guilt, revealing alliances, regrets, and secret pressures from within the palace walls. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what the monarchy had done to survive. No one knew what drove Andrew to record a second message. Some said it was guilt. Others whispered it was desperation. But whatever the reason, the timing was devastating. Just as the palace began to stabilize, Andrew's voice returned, quieter, yet far more dangerous than before. His words came slowly, as if each one carried the weight of decades spent obeying silent commands. He spoke of promises made and debts owed, of unseen hands that had shaped his downfall. There was no attempt at redemption, only confession. And in that confession, he turned the crown's most protected secrets into open wounds. He hinted that he had been sacrificed to preserve the image of the monarchy, his disgrace used as a shield to protect others higher up. The implication was clear. He was not alone in guilt. He was a casualty of a system that demanded perfection while hiding imperfection in its deepest chambers. As his words spread, speculation grew that his punishment had been orchestrated, a quiet agreement struck long ago to keep certain names out of headlines. The public, already torn between anger and exhaustion, suddenly found themselves divided. For a brief moment, sympathy began to shift. Was Andrew truly the villain, or a pawn in a larger royal game? But as quickly as compassion rose, it began to crumble. The full transcript of his confession painted a darker picture, one that blurred remorse with justification. He spoke of agreements made in the Queen's final years, references that hinted at last-minute settlements, the kind that blurred morality in exchange for legacy. Analysts debated who he was referring to, but the damage was done. Every word deepened the cracks in the monarchy's facade. The institution's silence screamed louder than any denial could have. Through it all, Sarah Ferguson remained silent. Her absence from public view stirred more questions than answers. Was she shielding her daughters from further pain? Or did she know something the rest of the world wasn't ready to hear? Her stillness became a symbol of both dignity and mystery, a silence more powerful than words. And at the heart of it stood Beatrice, torn apart by loyalty and despair. When she appeared on camera days later, her composure finally broke. Viewers watched as she tried to defend both her parents, her voice trembling as tears welled in her eyes. That moment, her raw vulnerability before millions became the viral centerpiece of global coverage, capturing a nation that had long forgotten what royal humanity looked like. For every confession Andrew gave, Beatrice paid the price in emotion. She had become the unwilling face of a family unraveling in real time. And yet, her heartbreak carried a strange strength, an unspoken defiance that even in the chaos, she refused to disown her truth. The confession tape, now fully public, forced Beatrice to make a choice to protect her father's dignity or defend the monarchy's last shred of stability. Behind the grand facade of Buckingham Palace, a secret war erupted. Advisors argued over statements, Charles's patience thinned, and Camilla's influence was suddenly questioned. Beatrice had become both a symbol and a problem, her tears inspiring millions while 5 threatening the royal hierarchy itself. For the first time, the monarchy feared not the press, but one of its own. Inside those walls, fury met fear. King Charles, usually composed and deliberate, could no longer hide his frustration. Beatrice's defiance had thrown centuries of royal silence into disarray. "This cannot continue," he reportedly snapped, pacing as advisors scrambled to contain the fallout. Every word Beatrice had spoken was replayed, dissected, and debated not because of what she said, but because of what it represented. Her public defense of her mother had challenged the monarchy's golden rule, loyalty to the institution above all else. Now, That rule was in danger of collapsing. Camilla, whose influence had quietly shaped the palace's internal strategy, demanded what she called containment. Her view was simple: if Beatrice's emotional rebellion wasn't swiftly silenced, the monarchy would lose its last grip on authority. She urged Charles to act decisively, even if it meant alienating his niece. Behind closed doors, her words carried weight, and whispers began circulating that the queen consort's patience with Beatrice had run thin. Yet not everyone agreed. William and Catherine, more attuned to the power of public sentiment, advised restraint. They warned that punishing Beatrice could backfire, that the public now saw her as a voice of truth within an institution built on restraint. Their counsel, however, was not enough to slow the inevitable tide of royal retribution. Soon after, internal memos began to circulate. Leaked emails spoke of plans to temporarily suspend Beatrice's royal duties, citing the need for strategic distance. The phrasing was cold, bureaucratic, and devastatingly clear. The palace was preparing to cut her off. But before the ink could dry, the public discovered the truth. Protesters gathered outside royal gates holding banners that read, "Let her speak," while online campaigns surged in her defense. The monarchy's attempt to silence her had backfired spectacularly. Beatrice had become a symbol of courage, her vulnerability transforming into quiet rebellion. Inside the palace, the pressure mounted. Charles, once the image of balance, now felt trapped between two worlds: the ancient expectations of royal duty and the modern demand for humanity. His health and composure began to strain under the pressure. Camilla insisted that weakness would only invite more defiance. But Sarah Ferguson, watching from the sidelines, could no longer stay silent. In a private appeal to Charles, she pleaded for an end to what she called a witch hunt against innocence. Her words struck him harder than she realized, stirring the guilt that no crown could suppress. Every decision, every silence, every word spoken behind closed doors rippled beyond the palace gates. The monarchy had turned inward, fighting itself in the name of survival. Beatrice's tears had become a revolution in motion, a single act of love transforming into a crisis of power. But the royal war of whispers couldn't be contained forever, because the next revelation would tear open everything the monarchy tried to hide. Weeks later, investigators unearthed a longer version of the tape, the unedited recording that revealed why Andrew's confession had been so heavily suppressed. Hidden references to royal cover-ups, internal blackmail, and a decades-old agreement between monarchs stunned the world. For Beatrice, it was the breaking point. Her tears transformed into fury as she realized her father's voice wasn't the only one recorded. The discovery came quietly at first. A team of independent analysts, working to verify the authenticity of the original audio, stumbled upon something buried in the metadata, a longer, encrypted version that had never been released. What they uncovered changed everything. This wasn't a mere confession anymore, it was a dialogue. Andrew wasn't alone on that tape. Other voices surfaced, faint yet unmistakable, belonging to high-ranking royal figures who discussed not guilt, but strategy. It was the monarchy speaking in its rawest form, calculating, desperate, and divided. In this uncut version, Andrew spoke of sacrificial decisions, cryptic words that seemed to reference the monarchy's practice of preserving itself by letting one fall to protect the rest. He mentioned names without full sentences, as though bound by fear or secrecy, but the implication was clear: his downfall wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated. The longer the world listened, the darker it became. Evidence pointed toward moments where financial and moral scandals had been deliberately buried, with members of the royal circle deciding which truths could be silenced to maintain the illusion of dignity. Every sentence was a dagger, every silence a revelation. Palace insiders had long whispered about the quiet machinery that controlled royal crises, but now the proof was undeniable. Andrew's confession, once seen as the desperate ramblings of a disgraced prince, began to look like the first crack in a massive web of manipulation. The recording captured discussions about staged narratives, controlled media leaks, and how public mercy could be manufactured. It hinted that behind every royal scandal lay an invisible hand, pulling the strings, deciding who would fall and who would be spared. The monarchy, long seen as a symbol of unity, was now portrayed as an empire of trade-offs. Beatrice's heart broke anew when she learned of it. For weeks, she had defended her father against relentless public outrage, believing the worst was over. But now, hearing the full tape in private, she felt both betrayal and rage. Her father's voice trembled not just from guilt but from fear of exposing others who had commanded his silence. Realizing this, Beatrice met quietly with a senior legal counsel, a move that hinted at her growing distrust in the very institution she was born to serve. She wanted answers the crown wasn't ready to give. Meanwhile, King Charles, cornered by global scrutiny, authorized a full internal inquiry. But many saw it as a symbolic act, a show of control, when control was already slipping away. The revelations within the tape had reached too far, too deep. Every word replayed on television carried echoes of corruption, of whispered secrets stretching back to the Queen's reign. And as investigators combed through archives, new speculation emerged, rumors of another hidden tape, one that involved Sarah Ferguson herself. If true, it meant that what had started as one man's confession was only the surface of a much larger storm. The monarchy's once unbreakable silence was cracking. Voices once buried in shadow were now creeping into daylight. Every new discovery peeled back a layer of the crown's polished image, exposing what lay beneath a history built not just on tradition, but on concealment. What began as one man's confession now turned into a generational reckoning, one that no crown could silence. As millions replayed the tapes, the British public began asking a dangerous question: if the royals could hide this, what else were they capable of concealing? Streets filled with protest banners reading, "Truth before tradition," and Beatrice's tearful image became the unexpected face of royal honesty. The monarchy's silence no longer inspired reverence, it inspired rage. What began as whispers of disappointment quickly transformed into a national uproar. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, demanding answers from the institution that had for centuries positioned itself as the moral compass of the nation. The air was thick with betrayal. People who had once waved flags in celebration now carried placards that read, "No more lies." Social movements sprang up overnight, led by voices that called not for the monarchy's destruction, but for its transformation. They wanted transparency, something the crown had never willingly offered. Global media, once deferential to royal protocol, joined in the rebellion. News anchors, talk shows, and international outlets amplified Beatrice's emotional stand. Her courage became the mirror through which the world examined the cracks in the monarchy's foundation. In a rare show of unity, journalists and citizens spoke the same language, one of truth, accountability, and justice. Beatrice, who had been silenced by advisors and dismissed as naive, suddenly became the emblem of honesty. The more the palace resisted comment, the louder the world became. Silence, once their strongest defense, had turned into their most damning confession. For the first time in decades, Parliament was forced to debate the monarchy's credibility. Lawmakers questioned the ethics of royal immunity and the power of secrecy. Heated arguments filled the chamber as some argued the crown was an outdated institution, while others claimed that reform, not rebellion, was the answer. The walls that once protected the monarchy from political intrusion were now under siege. Even within government circles, murmurs began to circulate about the possibility of a constitutional modernization act that could redefine the monarchy's role entirely. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Eugenie, moved by the magnitude of public unrest, agreed to a televised interview. What followed was one of the most emotionally charged broadcasts in royal history. Their voices quivered as they spoke about love, loyalty, and the burden of family expectation. Beatrice's sincerity melted hearts. Eugenie's quiet grief gave the story depth. For millions watching, the sisters embodied what the crown had long forgotten: humanity. In their pain, people saw themselves, and in their courage, they found hope. But inside the palace, the emotional tide was unbearable. Reports emerged that Queen Camilla had broken down privately, overwhelmed by the crumbling image. of the monarchy she had fought to uphold. She feared that every effort to modernize under Charles's reign had now been undone by secrets from the past. The monarchy, once feared for its power, now trembled under the weight of its own silence. King Charles, facing insurmountable pressure, found himself cornered. Every decision seemed like a betrayal to his legacy, to his mother's memory, or to the people's faith. Advisors urged abdication as the only way to preserve the monarchy's dignity. But for a man who had waited his entire life to wear the crown, surrender felt like death. The question that haunted him most was not whether he should step down, but whether the monarchy would survive even if he did. As Britain stood divided between loyalty and outrage, a new twist emerged. But amid the chaos and despair, a single letter surfaced, one written by Queen Elizabeth II herself years before her passing, that changed everything. In a sealed royal archive, an old handwritten letter was discovered, penned by Queen Elizabeth II and addressed to her beloved granddaughters. Its words were simple yet prophetic. Truth, no matter how painful, must outlive the crown. For Beatrice, those words were both her vindication and her heartbreak. In defending her mother, she had unknowingly fulfilled her grandmother's final wish. The letter emerged from a dusty box within the royal archives, its envelope marked only with the Queen's initials and dated years before her passing. No one had seen it since it was sealed, but when the archivist stumbled upon it during the internal inquiry, its timing felt divine. Within those few lines, the late Queen had anticipated everything: the fractures, the confessions, the reckoning that would one day shake her family to its core. She had written not as a monarch, but as a matriarch, one who knew that the survival of the crown depended not on perfection, but on truth. When Beatrice read the letter aloud during her final public address, the world fell silent. Her voice trembled, but her conviction did not. She spoke of her grandmother's wisdom, her belief that honesty was not the enemy of royalty, but its last defense. She knew, Beatrice said, pausing through tears, that the truth would come whether we welcomed it or not, and she chose courage over silence. Her words echoed across nations, transforming the scandal from a story of disgrace into one of redemption. What had begun as Beatrice's emotional rebellion had now become her grandmother's legacy fulfilled. King Charles, who had fought so fiercely to preserve the institution, could no longer deny the Queen's foresight. In private, he was said to have sat in silence for hours, reading and rereading her words. They were a reflection of everything he had tried to resist, an acknowledgement that transparency, not secrecy, would define the monarchy's future. For a brief moment, the unyielding weight of duty gave way to something human: understanding. He realized that his mother, even in death, had given him the answer he had been searching for. Prince Andrew, forever marked by his confessions, withdrew from public life entirely. No press statements, no interviews, just a quiet retreat into obscurity. For him, the letter was not vindication but absolution. It allowed him to fade without defiance, finally understanding that his silence could serve the family better than his words ever did. Sarah Ferguson, once the most vilified figure in the royal orbit, found herself restored in the public eye. Beatrice's courage had rewritten her mother's story, from scandal to survival. She was no longer seen as the outsider who tainted the crown, but as the woman whose endurance symbolized it. Public empathy swelled, not just for her, but for the idea that perhaps even within royalty, love could outshine duty. The monarchy, bruised but breathing, stood at a crossroads. What had once seemed like the end now felt like a beginning. A beginning, painful rebirth, carved through confession and courage. Beatrice had done what few dared. She humanized the untouchable, reminding Britain that beneath the jewels and titles were hearts capable of breaking, healing, and changing. As her speech drew to a close, Beatrice uttered the words that defined the moment. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy the crown, it purifies it. The phrase would later be etched into memorial plaques and quoted in history books as the line that redefined an era. And as Britain took a collective breath, the monarchy stood forever changed, not by politics or power, but by the tears of a daughter who dared to love. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.